City of Salem joint public hearing of the City Council and Planning Board, March 30th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. City Council joint public hearing with the Planning Board via remote participation in accordance with the state law and Governor Baker's emergency order on Tuesday, March 30th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. The purpose of the public hearing is to provide interested parties with an opportunity to comment on two proposed zoning ordinance amendments summarized below. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 5, these ordinances require a simple majority of the City Council in favor to be adopted. Notice of this hearing was posted on March 15th, 2021 at 7:59 a.m. and advertised in the Salem News on March 15, 2021 and March 22nd, 2021. Summary of amendments. 1. Section A, amending Section 3.1 Table of Principal and Accessory Use Regulations by deleting the accessory living area in its entirety and replacing it with affordable accessory dwelling unit constructed within or attached to a principal dwelling in the RC, R1, R2, R3, and NRCC zoning districts allowed by right, and adding affordable accessory dwelling unit within an existing detached accessory building in the RC, R1, R2, R3, and NRCC zoning districts allowed by right. Section B, amending Section 10 definitions by deleting the definition of accessory living area in its entirety and inserting the definition of affordable accessory dwelling unit in its place. Section C, amending Section 3.2.4 accessory buildings and structures to include dimensional regulations for detached affordable accessory dwelling units. Section D, amending Section 3.2.8 accessory living areas by deleting the existing text in its entirety and replacing it with a new ordinance. The existing text requires accessory units to be used solely by a family member or caregiver and requires a special permit. The purpose of the proposed new ordinance is to add this to the supply of rental housing to meet the needs of smaller households, to encourage efficient use of the city's housing supply while preserving the character of city neighborhoods, to allow the owner of an existing or proposed principal dwelling to construct one additional dwelling unit that is incidental and subordinate to the principal dwelling, and to increase the supply and diversity of housing options in response to demographic changes such as smaller households and older households. The ordinance allows for an affordable accessory dwelling unit within the principal dwelling or within an existing detached accessory structure by right, provided certain requirements are met, requires the property owner to reside on site, and removes the tenant restrictions of only a family member or caregiver. It prohibits an accessory dwelling unit from being created within a new detached structure. 2, amending sections 3.1, 10, and 3.2.4 and 3.28 as set forth above, except this proposed amendment also allows for an affordable accessory dwelling unit by special permit within a new detached structure in the RC, R1, R2, R3, and NRCC zoning districts. The complete text of the two proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance are on file and available for inspection by calling or emailing the city clerk's office at 93 Washington Street, Salem, Mass. 978-619-5610, or by emailing the city clerk, isimons@salem.com, or the Department of Planning and Community Development, second floor, City Hall Annex, 98 Washington Street, Salem, Mass. Phone number 978-619-5685, or emailing staff planner Mason Wells at mwells@salem.com. Absent from the council are none. Let me just make sure again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Councilor Christine Medor presiding. Also in attendance are members from the planning board. And I'll ask Mr. Chair Bill Grissett to introduce members of the planning board.
Thank you very much. Mason, if you would actually call the roll, please.
Yeah. Todd Waller. Here. Carol Hamilton.
Here.
Helen Sides.
Here.
Kurt Reeder.
Here.
Tom Fury,
Here.
Noah Courts,
Here.
Sarah Tarbett,
Here.
TJ Napolitano, absent.
Thank you.
And I am present as well.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we have two matters before both bodies this evening. I'm just going to quickly go over tonight's proceedings. I'm going to take up the first matter. We'll recognize Councilor Marcillo to do so and have the staff, or I think Mayor Driscoll was planning on saying a few words as well if she was planning to join us. So we'll open that up for a brief presentation and then followed by questions or comments from members of the City Council and the Planning Board. And once we take up those comments, we will open up for public comment. And since we have many members of the public in attendance, I'm seeing more than 32 members in attendance. I will go around and ask for members to speak in favor or speak in opposition. And I will ask members of the public to raise their hands and we will recognize you and mute you, allow you to speak. So we will do that for both matters and hope that members of the City Council and the Planning Board and the public will keep their comment precise. And as much as this is a public hearing, we do want to end on a reasonable time. I'm targeting 2 hours max. So I hope that everyone will respect each other's time this evening and make sure your comments are clear and to the point. So with that, I'm going to recognize Councilor Marcillo.
Thank you, Madam President. Just to confirm with you, do you just want me to start off with comments on the first one?
Yep, if you could read the order and we will allow the planning staff to make a statement.
I don't have the order in front of me. That's why I'm asking. I'm sorry.
All right, then I will.
It's just order number 68, amending zoning relative to ADU section 310, 3.2.4 and 3.2.8. And this is the one without the detached accessory building.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to members from city staff. I don't think.
Councilor Medora, the mayor is having tech issues, but she is called in.
Oh,
So I'm thinking she's probably on the participant list. I haven't gone over there yet.
The last three number 562.
is she the number ending in 562?
I believe so. Let me see. Yes, that is the mayor. So if you could promote the phone number or unmute the phone number, then the mayor can make her comments.
You should be unmuted. Mayor Driscoll?
Yes, I'm on. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your cooperation as I'm in an unstable internet environment right now, but I appreciate the opportunity to offer a few remarks. Is now the appropriate time?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank members of the council and the planning board and members of the public who may be joining us as we try and tackle this accessory dwelling unit ordinance for, we hope what the third time will be the charm here. I think many of us are familiar with the benefits of an accessory dwelling unit, enabling members of our community to create a smaller unit within their property line, within their building, within their property lines, to assist both the homeowner who may feel overhoused and have some spare space that they're interested in renting out to an individual, or for themselves to move into. ADUs, as they're known in shorthand, are well regarded as a smart growth zoning tool that utilizes existing infrastructure to create affordable units, generally affordable because they're smaller in size. In our particular case, I'm very proud of the fact that we have included a limitation on how much rent can be charged at 30% below market. with the goal of really helping us achieve additional units for individuals who fall what I call in the sweet spot, meaning you make too much to qualify for a subsidy, but you don't make enough to afford a fast raising rents in Salem. That often encompasses individuals in the service or tourism and hospitality industry, along with many others who are feeling hollowed out, as many of our multifamily properties are bought, rehabbed, and sold and or rented at a much higher price than they may have been in their prior condition. We hope both the council and the planning board will look favorably on this ADU and allow us to take what we think is a good policy, make it into a better one, and support an effort to allow more and greater affordability within our community. I'd like to turn it over to Amanda Ciancola, who many of you should know as a member of our planning staff who's done outstanding work, particularly with respect to housing. I would also point out that this proposal before you has received favorable reviews from a number of organizations, including the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, the League of Women Voters. I know the Salem Partnership and many members of our business community have spoken on prior public hearings as well to express their support for this initiative, which again is all about creating housing for the people who live here, for older adults who may feel overhoused, and certainly for us to provide an affordable way for individuals who want to remain in our community to stay here. Thank you.
Mayor. Amanda?
Sure. So I have a presentation that goes through the accessory dwelling units. This actually gives an overview of the second filing, the one that allows accessory dwelling units by special permit in a detached structure. Is it okay if I run through this second filing?
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me. It's really nice to see everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Amanda Ciancola, and I know a lot of you are very familiar with the accessory dwelling units in this issue, but I'm just going to very briefly go over what an accessory dwelling unit is, give a very quick overview of the current ordinance, the purpose of this amendment, a summary of the housing needs in Salem, and then I'll walk through the proposed ordinance, hitting the highlights of it. And if it's okay with Madam President, I'd like to hold off answering questions till the end because there's a little bit to go through here.
Sure.
Okay, next slide, please. And so accessory dwelling unit is just a residential living unit that's on the same property as another home. They take three forms. So it could be a repurposed internal space. So for example, a garage or in a basement. It could be attached to a home, such as an addition, or a detached unit separate from the home. So think of a carriage house. But a key factor in all of these instances is the word accessory has real meaning. It means the unit has to be secondary to the primary home. So the same way a garage is accessory, you can remove the garage or the ADU and the home still functions on its own, but you can't have a garage without a home. You can't have an accessory dwelling unit without the primary home. It has to be a secondary use. Next slide, please. So the current ordinance was adopted back in 2018. As mentioned, it's limited to caretakers and family members, and that just means that the only people who are allowed to live in the unit are people who are related to the homeowner or who care for the homeowner or someone in the home. To date, only 12 special permits for accessory units have been issued. It's only allowed in the R1 district, and it requires a special permit. So for those who are not familiar with what a special permit is, it means the use is discretionary upon approval of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So that means that the accessory unit has to be approved through a public hearing process. There'll be a notice that gets mailed to the neighbors, posted at City Hall, and that's so people know about the project and they can provide comments. And then the zoning board judges specific criteria for that special permit and then votes to approve the application through that public hearing process. Next slide, please. Every zoning ordinance has a purpose. And that's really important to keep in mind because everything else in the ordinance is a means to achieve the purpose. And so we want to make sure whatever requirements or criteria in this ordinance are included to accomplish that purpose. And we need to make sure that we're not adding anything that precludes that purpose from being met. So I highlighted the two key purpose items that are new here. It's to add affordable rental units to the housing market. To the housing stock to meet the needs of smaller households and to make households or housing units available to households who might otherwise have difficulty finding housing, and to increase the supply of housing and the diversity of housing options in response to demographic changes such as smaller households and older households. So those first two refer to the need for smaller households. And so I just want to briefly go over what that need is. Mason, next slide, please. So these graphs show that there's a pretty significant mismatch between the size of housing units in Salem and the size of households. So units being the physical structure and households being the people who live in the structures. The red outline on the first pie chart highlights that 24% of housing units in Salem are studios or one bedrooms. A studio apartment and a one bedroom assumes that there are 1 to 2 people in the household. Now the second pie chart shows that the majority, 71% of Salem's households consist of 1 or 2 people. So that's again why that purpose is so important, because there's a significant need for smaller units in the housing stock, and because we have smaller households, but there's just not enough units. And so we have an ordinance that allows for these accessory units, but again, it's only for family members. So I just want to highlight the household composition in Salem. Mason, next slide, please. So by household composition, I'm referring to families versus non-families. The data on the slide is from the American Community Survey. So the categories or definition of a family versus non-family is defined by the Census Bureau. So I have those two definitions on the slide. 46% of households in Salem are considered non-family. That means that you're in a home with people who are not related to each other by the traditional sense, by birth, marriage, adoption, or they're living alone. So keep in mind, people living alone get clumped into that non-family category. Of the family households, 17% are single parents with children under the age of 18. And that's largely single moms with kids. Of all the households with children in Salem, and by all, I mean family and non-family. So all the households with children in Salem, 40% are single parents. And that's a really high number in any location. And that's the population that would benefit from a 2-bedroom ADU. And that's why we included 2-bedroom, because we know that there's a need in Salem. Then of non-family households, 27% are 65 and older that are living alone. There's another 52% of non-family households living alone. So if you add those two up, you end up with 79% of the non-family households in Salem live alone, whereas the other 20% of roommates or non-family living arrangements. So we can't meet the purpose of creating housing options for smaller households if the only people allowed to live in accessory units are those people who had the benefit of family to accommodate them, especially since most of the households are single people living alone. And another important piece is income. So we looked at what does a family household income make versus a non-family household. Next slide, please. So in 2018, the median family income in Salem is estimated as $80,694. And the non-family, again, this is using those same definitions as before, is $44,000. That's a difference of $36,000 between a family household and a non-family household. So it's pretty significant. Most cost-burdened, low to moderate income households are smaller. So that's non-family, small family, elderly, and elderly non-family. Now, by cost-burdened, I mean that these households are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Many of the non-family households are people living alone, again, indicating the need for smaller, affordable non-family housing units. Next slide, please. Okay, so we went through the needs. Now I'm going to go through a summary of the ordinance that's before you tonight, starting with the requirements. A key requirement that the mayor had mentioned is that the accessory dwelling unit rent cannot exceed 70% of the fair market rent. And that's why we're referring to this as the affordable accessory dwelling unit. Now, again, keep in mind, accessory dwelling units are naturally occurring affordable units. So regardless of this requirement, the fair market rent percentage just puts the belt and suspenders on this ordinance. But I'm going to discuss the fair market rent a little more detail in the next slide. Next bullet, please. One parking space is required if the accessory unit is more than half a mile from an MBTA bus stop or train station. And this is another one that I'll talk about in more detail after I go over the fair market rents. Next bullet. A net loss of total caliper of private trees is not permitted unless a payment in the amount of $100 per caliper of the tree diameter breast height, CBH, is made to the tree replacement fund. The city has a tree ordinance that protects trees within the setback of a multifamily home with 5 or more units. But we heard from multiple community members throughout this process that there's a concern creating ADUs might lead to the removal of trees. Trees are incredibly important to the health and welfare of the city, so we want to make sure there's a protection there. This requirement ensures that in the event a tree is removed to create an ADU, it is mitigated through this replacement fund, because the tree ordinance doesn't apply to buildings with 4 or less units, which this ordinance does. It has to be a minimum of 350 square feet, and that's based on health code requirements. Next, please. It's a maximum of 900 square feet. And again, that makes sure that the accessory unit is subordinate to the main dwelling. Next, please. Limited to 2 bedrooms, again, making sure that it's accessory and subordinate. Next, please. Each lot is limited to 1 accessory dwelling unit. Next. It's not allowed in multifamily buildings with more than 4 units. So 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 unit, and 4 units is allowed. Once you get to 5, an accessory dwelling unit is not allowed. The property owner must reside in either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit. So remember when I mentioned that the accessory unit must be second or accessory to the home? This is where the next few requirements come in. Next, please. Utilities must be connected by a single service. Next. The unit cannot be sold or transferred separate from the principal dwelling. Next. The entry must be through the existing door, back door, or the side of the principal dwelling. If on the side, rear visibility must be minimized. Again, making sure that the building still looks the way it did before, that you can't tell there's an accessory unit because it's subordinate to the main unit. It has to be clearly subordinate in use, size, and design to the principal dwelling. Next. It must be capable of being discontinued. So again, that means the unit's accessory. So you can remove it from the primary home and the primary home will still function as a primary home. Next. And short-term rentals are prohibited. So we desperately need year-round housing unit options. Short-term rentals do not meet the purpose of the ordinance. So that's when I said you can't have things that preclude the purpose from being met. So this is to make sure that we get year-round housing units out of the ordinance. Next. The proposed ordinance prevents accessory dwelling units from being rented for more than 70% of the fair market rent limit for Salem. Now, the fair market rents are determined by HUD, and that's looking at, what the fair market rents are, and they adjust it annually. So the maximum rent, the 70%, is shown on the screen. And these are maximums, not minimums, and it includes utilities. Now, again, the accessory units are naturally occurring affordable. There tend to be, you know, a basement apartment might not even rent for as much as we show here. So again, it's a maximum. We suspect that they might rent even lower than this. Now, I have heard concern that these rents are not affordable enough. So I just wanted to note that creating an ADU is a significant investment for the homeowner. In most cases, the homeowner has to take out a loan to finance the construction. So we want to make sure that the affordability requirement is not so restrictive that it prevents the owner from being able to recoup that cost on investment. But that said, the rents are affordable to a lot of Salem residents and employees. So I just wanted to give an overview of a few people who would benefit from this. So there are a few examples here. You know, a police dispatcher. These are city employees. I actually have a couple examples that I'll read out that are non-city employees too. A police dispatcher earns about $50,000 a year. This is a single person who could afford a studio accessory dwelling unit. A city groundskeeper at $51,000 could also afford a studio, but then you go up to a police patrol officer at $57,000 could afford a one bedroom. And by afford, I'm using that term again, means that they're not cost burdened. So they can reasonably pay for this unit without going over 30% of their income. Now, a cook, I have that as a little star because that's not a city employee. That data is taken from the Massachusetts Labor and Workforce Development site at mass.gov, and it's the median income for a cook in Salem. They could afford about $868 a month. By themselves, wouldn't be able to afford a unit, but it's not unrealistic to have people roommate up in that situation. And so, you know, two cooks or people of similar wages could afford a 2-bedroom unit. Next slide, please. I also wanted to share a comparison of ADU rents to what a typical market rate unit would go for. Next bullet. According to Rentometer, which is a neat little tool you can use to check what the rents are in an area. The average rent for a 1-bedroom unit in Salem between September 2019 and August of 2020 was $1,658. Now, that doesn't include utilities, whereas the 1-bedroom accessory dwelling unit cannot exceed $1,347, and that includes utilities. So there's about a $300 difference there. Next bullet, please. So I scan rental units every couple months, and I'm just continuously shocked at how expensive it is to rent an apartment. And I think anyone who has also just looked through Craigslist would find this as well. So a couple of weeks ago, I just jotted down all the units on Craigslist in Salem and just ran through the averages. Now, some of them are duplicates. Some include utilities, some do not. This is just a really high level picture to give you an idea of what's out there today or a couple of weeks ago on the housing market. So of 43 units listed for 1-bedrooms, the average was about $1,800 a month. There were 32 bedrooms listed and the average was $2,000 a month. And there was a studio apartment listed for $1,200 a month. So it was very similar, comparable to the rent of the accessory dwelling unit, but there was only one listed. There just aren't enough options. And I haven't gone back to update these numbers, but I suspect if you ran through the listings, those averages would probably still hold up today. Next, please. Okay, so on to parking. As I previously mentioned, if the accessory unit is more than half a mile from the MBTA train station or bus stop, it requires one off-street parking space. But if the ADU is half a mile or less from the train station or bus stop, it does not require the parking space. And this is measured in a straight line or as the crow flies on the map. And you can see the map here of where parking would not be required. And keep in mind the parking requirement for the primary home cannot be counted towards the ADU's parking space. So the zoning ordinance requires 1.5 spaces for every residential unit, and that's rounded up when it lands on the halfway point. So that means a single family home with an affordable accessory dwelling unit within 1/2 mile of public transit would be required to have 2 spaces. But if it's more than 1/2 mile of the transit, it would be required to have 3 spaces. And then a 2-family with an ADU within 1/2 mile of the transit would be required to have 3. If it's more than 1/2 mile, it would be required to have 4, and so on, as you can see in this chart. Next slide. So there are a couple reasons why we are proposing to reduce parking near transit. Most residential properties in Salem would just never be able to accommodate an additional parking space for the accessory dwelling unit. And that's because most of Salem's homes are older in densely settled historic neighborhoods, and they don't comply with the dimensional requirements, including parking. We ran through an exercise to measure this. Calculating the lots, whether they comply with parking or not, is tough to do with the mapping software. But we were able to run lot size requirements, and we found that 91% of the R1, R2, and R3, so looking at all those lots together, 91% do not comply with the minimum lot size. And that means the lots are smaller than what zoning requires. And so if the lots don't comply with the minimum lot size, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to accommodate yet another parking spot. And you can see that in this map, all the pink lots do not comply with lot size and the green ones do. So we studied this a lot before coming up with the proposed threshold for when parking is required and not required. And planners tend to refer to housing within 1/2 mile from transit as transit-oriented development. And that's just because there's a lot of literature that shows 1/2 mile is a reasonable distance to walk or use another method of transportation other than a vehicle to get to public transit. So I included a link at the bottom of the slide, or after this bullet point here. And it goes to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council's Perfect Fit Report. That's just one example of literature that studies the supply and demand for parking. It's a very well-researched document. It demonstrates that excess parking has real consequences. They show that abundant parking at developments in close proximity to public transit is counterproductive. It attracts car owners. It makes housing less affordable for car-free or car-limited households. It encourages residents to use cars for trips that could otherwise be made from transit, walking, biking, etc. And I also just want to note that in Salem, there's a real opportunity to be car light or car free. You all know we have regional connections through the train. We have a whole bunch of micro mobility options to get around the city, between the Salem Skipper and the Blue Bike. We also have a municipal car share in the pipeline. So again, just to recap, the reason we're not proposing parking is because if the unit is in close proximity to transit, there's an actual opportunity to not need a car, and we need small housing options. And if we require parking, it's going to preclude most of the lots in Salem from being able to create those housing options. Next slide, please. So remember, an ADU, it could be inside a basement or an attic or freestanding, which we refer to as detached. The detached building is not connected to the primary home. For the permit process, I'm going to start with detached. And this is, again, that second filing. So remember, a special permit, it's a really good option to help mitigate neighborhood character concerns. Buildings like a garage or accessory buildings are allowed to be closer to the property line than a primary home because it assumes that a car is going to be parked there, not people living there. And we wanted to make sure that if an existing detached accessory building is going to be converted into a residential unit, and if the existing detached building does not meet the required setbacks of what a primary building would be required in its zoning district, because it varies depending on the district, then a special permit would be required. And that's so, again, the neighbors can participate in that process and share concerns if they have any. Likewise, if the existing accessory building is going to be expanded, regardless of whether it meets setbacks or not, it will require a special permit. And then lastly, if the new accessory building is going to be constructed, so it's a brand new accessory building, that would require a special permit. Next slide, please. So there are some situations that will not require a special permit, but in any event, everything needs a building permit. So the ADU, if it is in an existing detached structure, so say again, a garage example, and if that existing detached structure is not expanded and it meets the setbacks required of the primary structure, and that is irrespective of whether the primary structure meets the setbacks. So let's say a 10-foot setback is required of the primary structure. The existing structure is only, the existing primary is only 8 feet, but the accessory is 10 feet and meets that requirement, then it would not require a special permit. I know that was a lot of numbers I just threw out there, but the goal there is that the accessory structure meets the required setbacks of the primary structure. Next bullet. Other instances when a special permit is not required is when the ADU is within the principal dwelling. So if you put an accessory unit in a basement, you do not require a special permit for that. That's a building permit. Next one. And also if the accessory dwelling unit is going to be attached to the principal dwelling, and if that addition is in compliance with all the dimensional requirements, then it's allowed by building permit. So it's the same process as if you wanted to build an addition onto your home to bump out your living room. That's allowed by right if you meet your dimensional requirements, just as an ADU would be. Next slide, please. So, you know, this ordinance is just one of many housing strategies we're working on. And I think the data demonstrates that we need small units, that these rents would be very useful for Salem residents and employees of, you know, whether it's a downsized adult, a young adult leaving their parents' home, an essential worker. And we know that employers need employees. So I just wanted to end with a couple of comments we heard from the business community last year when we proposed this ordinance. You know, Eastern Bank supported the ordinance. The HR director had said she saw firsthand the impacts of the lack of affordable housing, particularly in hiring and retaining talent for their business. Same with Salem 5. They want to hire members of the community, but it's increasingly difficult to do so because there's just not enough homes for their employees to live in. Next one. Hawthorne Hotel said 70% of their workforce live in Salem and do not own a car. They need ADUs to help their employees. Next one. And then this was the Salem Partnership, and they have members from banks, hospitality venues, public institutions, nonprofits, and their members saw that it is extremely difficult for their employees to live here because there's just not enough housing. And again, they supported the ordinance last year. And then last one, I just want to end on Dr. Roberts, who has become a household name in Salem, who said he is in favor of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance because he wants Salem residents who can afford to live here and work at the hospital, and that's becoming difficult to do. So next slide is just my questions. So that concludes my presentation. Again, as I stated in the beginning, I know you're all familiar with the issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, for that excellent presentation. There's a lot of new data that I didn't even know about, especially with the mismatch of household and unit sizes. That's pretty incredible data. Thank you for doing all that research. So I will take up questions or comments from members of the council. Councilor McCarthy. Oh,
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you,
Councilor
Madam President.
McCarthy, before you start, I just wanted to quickly clarify that we're taking up order number 68, which is the first filing, and then the second order is order number 97, which you had filed to include the detached accessory dwelling unit into the table. So both orders are identical except for the table. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so we may be talking about both orders, but I just want to make that clarification. So,
Okay.
Councilor McCarthy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. To Amanda or to Tom, first of all, thank you for your presentation. Most of us were on a presentation yesterday. Could you, referring back to the slide about the accessory unit being 900 square feet? Right there, 900 square feet. In the presentation we were in last night, the woman from the governor's office referenced some language that said that the accessory unit will be no larger than half the size of the main house or 900 square feet. Is that reference? I was following along. I may have missed it. Is that referenced someplace in here, or is that something that we should be looking to add?
I would recommend that you add that. It's not currently in the ordinance. So add a section that's the accessory.
Yeah, because I mean, that was on the presentation at the, I can't remember the woman's name from the, that was on the presentation last night, but she, in the literature, the PowerPoint that she gave to us, I was flipping through that last night after the meeting, and I saw that half the size of the main home. So I think that that's important that we add that in there someplace. And at some point, I'll be making, Madam President, I'll be making that as a motion to somehow amend it wherever Amanda feels it best fits in. And then my last question would simply be, you referenced earlier that 12 permits were issued to this date from when we first passed the accessory dwelling unit that's on the books with regards to family members and caregivers. Out of those 12 permits, how many were for new construction units, or how many were for existing units that people decided that they had altered their structure somehow and it already existed and they wanted to get it into quote unquote legal form, so to speak? I mean, I would assume that a few of those, I mean, we look at the 12 that were built or 12 that were permitted, I would assume that a handful of them probably were in people's homes that they already existed, but they were taking advantage of the fact that we have an ADU ordinance where we put one on the books that allowed them to make them, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, legal, as opposed to someone who had like an illegal apartment, or they were doing some sort of rental that wasn't, this gave them the opportunity to come to do that. So if you don't know, that's fine. If you could just get it to me at some point. That was just a question.
No. I think, yeah, so 3 of them were to legalize an existing unit. 9 of them were to create a new unit. 1 of them was in a new home being built. So at the time the home was built, that unit was created at the same time.
Okay, so basically, so you're telling me over that time period, we only 8 of them were created due to the new, or well, 9 of them. 1 was in a new home, but so 9 of them were created that way?
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Terrio.
Thank you, Madam President, through you. So I have a couple of questions that came up, in my reading of all this and looking through the ordinance. One is and this is a conceptual one for me. I have some trouble picturing, knowing that there's a lot of 2 families where there's split houses and half houses here in Salem. I understand pretty well, I think, how an ADU would work within, say, a 2-family on, for instance, Chestnut Street, where you've got 2 sides of a building, or on Lafayette Street, where you have 2 sides of the building, there's a wall between the 2 sides, you'd build an ADU out of one of them. I have trouble imagining how that would work in a 3-family or a 4-family. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to the idea of doing one, but I don't really understand how there would be a practical way to do that, and how in a multifamily dwelling like that, how many of those would be owned by a primary owner anyway, where they own one unit and then are renting out multiple units. So I'm not sure if including it in 3 and 4 families is worth the trouble, but I think it's harmless to be there, but I guess that's kind of just a point I want to check. The other thing is I've said this, before, and I said this when this was previously before us. I'm not crazy about the idea of requiring affordability and pegging it to an arbitrary number, because I'm not sure how it would be calculated first, or how we could consistently calculate and enforce that rent. That's a concern for me, how we're pegging it to a particular figure. So that's a bit of an issue. I would rather see the market in a case. I'm not always a fan of the almighty market, but I think in a case like this, the natural tendency of ADUs as a subordinate use is probably more affordable than would be more affordable by its very nature. So that's another thing there, and I'd rather see us rely more on incentivization to keep that cost down than to actually have it written into the ordinance. So that'd be my preference. I generally support the concept of doing this regardless, but I think forcing the issue may have the unintended consequence of also depressing that market and resulting in fewer ADUs being built. The other one, finally, is to get into the issue of detached structures. My personal stance on this is I would not want to see in the final ordinance that's before us, I would not want to see new detached structures being permissible for ADU usage. I don't really have a problem with a garage or a carriage house that's already existing, having that use added to it, or in the case of a garage, maybe, or the carriage house converted, or in the case of a garage, probably added to it, like on an upper level. So in that sense, I think a standalone building is fine, although my concern there again gets into something that has been said by people who oppose this, which is putting 2 buildings on one lot is effectively, even though they're linked by the deed, you're still effectively turning it into 2 houses on a lot. But I think when you have an existing structure, it should be something that we permit. So those are more thoughts for how we shape this going forward than specific questions. But I really would like to dig a little deeper into those issues as we build this out. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from members of the council? Councilor Hapworth.
Thank you, Madam President, and excellent presentation, Amanda. There's a lot of new data there that I hadn't seen before, so really appreciate that. I think I've seen some of these statistics before, but just for folks at home and for the rest of the group here, where do you see, based on what you've seen in other communities, what is the high end of what we could expect for success in terms of a percentage of total units in the city, and what's the low end? Like I think there's a lot of talk about what this could end up doing in the city. What have you seen in cities like Portland, Oregon versus cities closer to home here who've tried that?
Yeah, it's really hard to say because of all the ordinances I've looked at, none are quite like Salem's. This is pretty unique. In Amy Dane's research that I shared out last year, and that is available at imaginesalem.org, or you can use your search engine of choice to find Amy Dane's white paper on accessory dwelling units. She found that in the North Shore, municipalities that allow accessory units without restriction have created 1.4 units for every 1,000 homes. So if we looked at that rate, it would be about 34 units over a 3-year period. But again, that's a bit arbitrary because, Salem's ordinance is so very different. From when I've talked to other communities that allow accessory dwelling units without a tenant restriction, they have said that, the influx of units that come at the front end tend to be to legalize existing units. So I would suspect that we might get a lot of units on the very front end, and that's legalizing existing. And I think that's a really good thing because it makes those units safer. It means that they have to meet building code requirements and health code requirements, but it's not particularly new units created.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam President. I also wanted to thank Amanda for a great presentation. My question or my concern is kind of similar to the Go War 5, just to real in regard to how are we going to police? I mean, who is going to be in charge of making sure that all of these requirements that you mentioned that the audience have will be compliant? Because one of the issues we have, is that sometimes we don't maintain some of the things that we have. We have some complaints, so many complaints on the maintenance of the park, in so many other aspects of the city. How are we going to keep up with those requirements? We know that for a fact that we have some illegal ADU in the city, and nobody seems to worry about it. In the event that we have many others, how are we going to be able to police those requirements? Thank you.
Amanda.
Yeah, so what we're requiring is when the application is submitted, the homeowner has to sign a letter attesting to the rents if they do not exceed the 70% of fair market rent. We're trying to create this a really easy, simple process to administer and for the homeowner as well. Because again, these are homeowners and not developers. So we wanted to create a pretty low bar for them. So really it's enforced by that, they're signing a document that's saying, we attest these units are going to be limited to 70% of fair market rents. And then if those rents are increased, then the tenants can inform the city and there'll be, compliance requirements. But we're not going to check these units every year. There's just not enough capacity to do that.
If I may, Madam President.
Yep, go ahead.
I understand that's concerning the affordability components, which I think is easy to check. My concern is that so many false information. Sometimes people say they live over there and they don't live there. Sometimes you can apply to one parking space, but there's so many cars in the street that nobody knows where they're coming from. Sometimes you have properties who actually are short rent and nobody really care about it. And at the end of the day, what we've seen is that our quality of life in our neighborhood has been destroyed. We have called many times. I know that some of my colleagues might agree with me on that, on complaints, on things that happen. And sometimes we don't have the solution because there is no one policing. So my concern, along with other concern, is how we're going to keep up with those complaints or what do you call it, requirement that people need to be by the law. When we, at the end, we seem to have shorted on personnel. Are we going to assign any department or any personnel? We're going to hire somebody that's going to be in charge of that area, or that's going to be just the same way it is right now? I don't know if my question is very clear, but my concern is how we're going to keep up with more when what we have right now, sometimes we don't exactly present a good record of what we're maintaining.
Yeah, the building inspector will be in charge of enforcing the ordinance.
Thank you, Amanda. I want to make a quick comment that it's dangerous to associate new rental units with people who might cause crime or harm the city in any way. I think that is a very dangerous association, and we have to remember that the ordinance will empower existing Salem residents, Salem homeowners to build units for people who may already be living here. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's very harmful to suggest that more units and driving more people living in these rental apartments might induce crime. So I just wanted to point that out. Councilor Terrio.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a brief follow-up question that relates to the affordable median rent figure. Amanda, do you have a handle? Because I know you have a ton of facts and numbers at your disposal here, because you've been on this for literally the last 2 years, pretty much. And thank you for working so hard on this. Do we have an idea as to roughly what on the open market ADUs tend to rent at compared to open market units? Like, what is the natural, there is some natural discount factor due to their accessory use, but do you know approximately what that typically is?
From what I've heard from realtors and who have looked at this and, literature that they've seen, it tends to fall between 6% and 25% below what the market rate rents are. It's just there's so much in between that 6 and 25%, depending on the features of the accessory dwelling unit.
The features, the size, the amenities, the neighborhood, all sorts of things. Of course. Because one of the points I was kind of making this is that there is a natural factor for ADUs to have there's no guarantee of affordability in other communities that just allow these by right without any rent restrictions, but you don't have a guarantee as to what that number is. You just know it's going to be a number that is lower than the comparable standalone rental. Just, we don't know exactly how much that is, and that's going to depend on what the homeowner chooses to build. So, and obviously encouraging it to be affordable to the homeowner and affordable to the prospective renter is a plus. So just wanted to get a handle on that, because I figured you'd have a good number for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the council? Councilor Dibble.
Thank you, Madam President. It's good to see everybody here together. This is round 3, and I think it's going to pass this time, thanks to some of the changes that the state had made. Salem has really nice neighborhoods, and whatever we do here, we need to make sure that we balance creating these additional units with protecting our neighborhoods. So we really need to pay attention to the details within this whole draft ordinance to make sure that if we're going to do this, we do it right, and we don't hurt our neighborhoods. So with that, I'd like to get, before our next meeting, I'd like for all of us, the planning board and the city council, to get a written comments back. Let's get the ordinance, this draft, to our zoning enforcement officer, Tom St. Pierre, and get written comments back from him, because he is the one, and his department is the one that will have to enforce these rules. And if it conflicts with other zoning issues, he could probably easily correct some of the wording in here or technicalities in here and add some advice to this. So I would like to see his written comments back to us before we meet again. I'd also like to get a legal opinion from our city solicitor on the legality of the city, a public entity, establishing and setting the cost of rent in a private home. I question whether that's legal, but as the good Ward 1 council likes to say often, I'm not a lawyer, so I'd like to get that legal opinion so we're on firm ground. I question the sewer and pipes, our aging infrastructure, if we can handle the additional loading on this, but I don't really think there's a way that can be easily determined. So I'm not going to ask the city engineer to comment on that. When we talk about the affordable accessory dwelling units, I don't think that 30% is deep enough and is affordable enough, because if we're using the Boston area median income, that doesn't bring it to 30%. That brings it significantly less than that. So I think we should, if we're going to do something and do something truly affordable, we should go deeper. I sat on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board for quite some time, and we had this discussion over and over again. So I'm thinking 50% would be more appropriate, or maybe 40%, but I'm going to recommend 50% that we change it to. And I appreciate Amanda's discussion of the affordability, but there are a lot of units that could be and exist in Salem that could happen very easily. One of them on my house. I already have a second floor of my ranch, and I could easily turn that into a unit for very short money. So it's a lot of houses could do this very, very inexpensively. I have a little bit concerns and questions about the second house being allowed. Basically, what this ordinance does is allow every single family house in Salem, every property to become a two-family property. So the single family R1 zoning it doesn't really go away, but it kind of does. So if you're allowed to put a second freestanding house on the same property, how far away from the primary house does that second house have to be? Is there setbacks from each house? Or could you have an alleyway of 5 feet between them, et cetera? I didn't see that in here, so I think we need to at least speak to that. So how does the second house sit with side setbacks and rear setbacks and front setbacks? So a second house on the property, whether it's an existing garage that's renovated to something bigger, or a new second house on the property that's built from scratch, that second house should not interfere with the quality of life of the abutter. So it should not be able to go right up against the property line or 5 feet from the property line, whereas it would impact the abutter's rear backyard and privacy that they may have. So if we do this, we need to make sure that we're not hurting the neighborhood, if you would. I got like 2 more points, I think it is. I'm wondering why, and maybe Amanda can answer this through our president, why, and I don't expect to do it now, but why are we limiting this to 2 bedrooms? If we think about the pros and cons of doing this, and we have an average size house, and that average or large size house is going to cull off a portion of their existing structure to make it into an ADU. So perhaps it was a 4-bedroom house originally, and now it gets kind of divided in half, and we have 2 units in that building, and they're both having 2 bedrooms each now. So now the larger house is not suitable for a family with several children or a few children, and the ADU is not suitable for a family with a few children. So both units are not conducive for families with children, and we lost the original house that was suitable for children. So we're hurting family, I think, by allowing this without a better sense of wording into this document. We're hurting housing here in Salem for families. We're reducing the volume of housing for families with children. The short-term rental one concerns me. I do like that, Amanda, you added in that they're prohibited in the accessory dwelling unit. I think that if we're going to do this, and I'm serious about this one, I'm serious about all of them, but this one here is a crucial point for me. If we're going to allow an accessory dwelling unit to go into the property, both sides of this should not be allowed to be short-term rentals. So we want permanent housing in Salem. Let's require that the primary house and the affordable dwelling unit house or the unit itself, none of them are short-term rentals. Both sides of the coin. What if in the document we talked about the affordable dwelling unit, you have to add gross square footage to the house to allow it to happen. What if you have a big house and you don't have to add square footage to the house? You don't have to put an addition on the house. How about, so that's under 8, section 8 under definitions. We're requiring that you have to add gross square footage. I think that's a typo. We didn't think about it fully. We should be allowed to divide a house and not have to add an addition to the house. So I think we need to tighten up the wording on that a little bit. And that's it. So Amanda, nice presentation. Thank you again. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Counselor. Amanda, would you like to address some of those questions, or you want to follow up after the meeting with Counselor Dibble?
I'll follow up. Some of them, were for the city solicitor and the zoning enforcement officer. I do want to note that the zoning enforcement officer has reviewed this, or I sent it to him a couple of times and did not receive any comments. As for why limit it to 2 bedrooms, we just want to make sure that the accessory unit is subordinate in size to the primary home. So I just want to keep that in mind, but I'll follow up.
Lastly, if I can, Madam President.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was a little bit confused why we have 2 orders before us that were submitted 2 weeks apart from each other. So I'm wondering if perhaps Amanda or Tom Daniels can, in 2 sentences, basically explain why and what the major differences are between the 2. I've read them, compared them side by side, but I want to make sure it's clear to everybody why we have a second one as well, and what the differences are, because it's relatively simple.
The second one was filed by Councilor McCarthy, but I'll let Amanda clarify.
Sure. So the first ordinance that was filed did not allow accessory dwelling units in a new detached structure. The second filing that was filed by Councilor McCarthy does allow new accessory dwelling units or a new detached structure to have an accessory dwelling unit with a special permit.
So that basically that would be a second house on the same property, but it would be a smaller house. Is that right?
An accessory dwelling unit on the same property.
Right. So we're talking a second house?
An accessory dwelling unit on the same property.
Amanda has answered your question that it is a second accessory dwelling unit, not a second house. So I see Councilor Flynn with his hands raised. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. I just had a quick question for Amanda and for Tom, actually 2 quick questions. Through the city, as we can see, we have a lot of developments going on. And, I hear a lot of talk that a lot of these projects that are finishing up now are empty, that they can't really get full capacity of people that want to rent. If you know anything, stats about that is one of my questions. And my second question is, I've had a lot of pushback on this up in Ward 4. By far, the majority not in favor of this. And my question is, how does this legally affect what a true R1 neighborhood is if we went through with this? I mean, as far as one thing, adding on to a house, but having a second dwelling. Legally, would that even be possible by the true definition of an R1 neighborhood? Because I've had these questions asked to me, and I truly don't have the answers for people. So maybe you can answer those 2 brief questions, please. Thank you.
Sure. So I have not heard that, new developments are having a difficult time renting their units. I will speak to Salem's vacancy rates. A vacancy rate is just a measure of the housing market, how many units are vacant versus occupied. The vacancy is measured based on a percentage of total housing units. So Salem's estimated vacancy rates for rental units was 3.8%. That's very, very low. That just means that there's not that many rental units available. And you can see that, again, if you just browse through Craigslist or any other listing for apartments, there's not a whole lot available. I have seen some developments in Salem, recent developments that I know are fully occupied, but I haven't been following all of them. As for the legality of accessory dwelling units in the R1 neighborhoods, these are, again, they're accessory subordinate units. It's still an R1 residential neighborhood because these units are secondary. They can easily be removed, and that primary home still stands on its own. So that's where that secondary use has real meaning.
Now, how could they easily be removed if another dwelling was built on a would we really expect someone to build a standalone structure and then take it down once it's done? I mean, is that really reasonable? Or?
The hope is that it does not get taken down because we very much need these units. But if there was an issue with compliance, if the homeowner was not complying for some reason, the unit could be dismantled, and that would be by removing what makes it a second unit, the kitchen or, items to that effect.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor. Any further questions or comments from members of the council? Okay, we'll turn it over to members of the planning board with questions or comments. Ms. Sides.
I have some, I want to be careful to make this too difficult to do. I think there's an awful lot of regulations written into this, and some of it is sort of too much. But individually, I would say that I too had a very strong reaction to the idea that the people that are deciding to do this with their property, whether to provide space for a relative or to rent it, would somehow be more likely to break the law and to misuse their property that way. That's offensive. The other thing is that the affordability question is interesting, Mr. Turiel, because I think in an awful lot of cases, the opportunity is being taken by the homeowner in order for them to stay in their house, to make it affordable for them to be there. I think that a large majority of these projects will still be family related. And so therefore that affordability does need to be passed on if they can afford to pass it on. I think that when Councillor Dibble says that, you can easily flip these things and make it inexpensive to turn a part of a house into a dwelling unit, it's just not true. Construction is incredibly expensive. Adding bathrooms and kitchens and that kind of living space, whether it's within your house or attached to your house, or you're lucky to have a carriage house you can convert, all of those instances require that all of this is connected to the same utilities. Splitting that off, that is also what makes this part of one dwelling, is that sharing of utilities. I find that some of the parking restrictions are overly restrictive. The idea that a single family house that now has an accessory dwelling unit would have to add additional parking when zoning already limits the amount of, access onto the property, the curb cut. How do we provide all of that off-street parking? We're a dense city and we enjoy being in a city. I don't see that this is as damaging as a lot of people seem to view it. The other thing is that, we're adding on to a 3 or 4 dwelling unit, adding on to something that already is multifamily. I don't think that any of us, even architects, can say off the cuff without seeing the individual project that there's no way to add on to something. I mean, it takes the study, it takes the design, it takes the financing to figure out whether it's possible. So don't eliminate options before a person may have the opportunity to do something on their own property. So I just would be careful of the amount of restrictions we're trying to put on this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fury.
Yes, please. Madam President, thank you. It's nice to be back in the chambers. Nice to be part of the planning board. I really appreciate being a part of the planning board and admire the amount of work and homework they do. And I sincerely hope and agree with the mayor that I hope the third meeting will not only be a charm, will be a grand slam. The first day of the baseball season is tomorrow for the Red Sox at Fenway Park. I hope this could be a grand slam for the city because it has a human face. Each slide that Amanda did has a human face and a human need. Amanda, an amazing presentation, because whether you work at the Salem Hospital, whether you work at the Hotel Hawthorne or the PBS Museum where I work, housing has a human face. I used ADUs over a period of 40 years, having adopted 5 children, and they were units in owner-occupied homes. And I agree with Councilor Turiel. I don't think we should lock in the homeowner to a certain rent because it's their advantage, the homeowner, for their own property to maintain, upkept, and I think they'll keep it below the radar screen, below. I was in very affordable conditions there, and I could afford that as a teacher. So I agree with Councilor Churio, not to keep it in concrete. It's the best interest of the homeowner to keep it in his best interest, as sometimes even when I lived on the ADUs, the people would go away on vacation down to Florida, up to Maine, to Canada, and here I was keeping care of their home, maintaining their home with my children. And it was a win-win situation for my family. One of my sons says that it was the best house he ever lived. He never realized what a family was until he lived in an ADU. And I think this is a real human situation. And I hope you respect and recognize the role and responsibility of the planning board. I really enjoy being on it. And having served 24 years on the city council, this is our third attempt. Sincerely, this will be a grand slam. I hope you listen to the planning board. They put time and effort into their work. It's a voluntary situation there. They put a human face into it. They dot the I's, cross the T's. And I agree with Helen, and I agree with the other members of the planning board. I think you should give this a chance. The planning board has had this 3 times. Amanda's done an amazing presentation. Tom Daniel, I agree with the mayor. 3 times. Passion, perseverance on the mayor's part. She sees the city with a human face, citywide. Housing has a human face. I saw it when I was with children, whether it's a single senior citizen myself now, or with children. These affordable housing units, ADUs, could be very possible. They're not the magic bullet. They're not going to be like rabbits and chickens. And I think Councilor Flynn thinks these are going to be like rabbits and chickens in a neighborhood, and it's going to destroy the neighborhood of single-family homes. I totally disagree. They're going to enhance a single-family neighborhood. And that's what a single-family neighborhood is, families. And it's going to enhance the family situation. So whatever we can do on the planning board, I hope you respect our role and responsibility and work on it, and not make this a divisive issue, a positive issue above ground, that we can come up with a grand slam on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. Any further comments from members of the planning board? Mr. Koretz.
Thank you. So just a quick comment about the enforceability issue. So I think that's pretty easy to handle in the sense that, you know, this is going to be a relatively, I anticipate, relatively manageable number of units citywide. And I think, you know, if we're pegging affordability to rental limits, you know, the easiest way to deal with that is do it through the tenants, right? If you're a tenant of one of these units, the city is going to have all of these units registered. They're going to know where they are. You send communications via, you know, letter, email to all the tenants. I'm a homeowner now, but I've spent, I guess, the majority of my adult life as a renter, and I assume most people, you know, listening to this are either renters now or have been at some point. If you got a letter from the city saying your landlord was charging you too much rent, what would you do, right? And then that way the enforcement kind of takes care of itself. And so I worry that the enforcement issue is a little bit of a red herring. You know, renters are going to be notified when they move into these units if that portion of the ordinance passes, that there are rent limits. They're pretty easy to figure out. And they'll be continuously, you know, every so often notified of what they are. And if their landlords are trying to charge them more than that, they're going to complain to the city, and that's how the enforcement happens. So I don't think there's any need to make it more complicated than that. I think it's a non-issue. You know, on the affordability issue that Councilor Turiel brought up, you know, I'm a little bit torn. I see what he's saying. I do think, though, that there is this kind of like missing middle of affordability, right? Because the affordability needs of the community are, you know, it's a vast continuum, right? From the lowest income residents to the highest income residents in a lot of different tranches. And unfortunately, most of the, you know, capital A affordable housing, the deed restricted affordable units that have public subsidy in them in the city, have very rigid income requirements, right? They're pegged at a particular, you know, 30% AMI, 50% AMI, 80% AMI, 60% AMI. Like, those are basically the options depending on the mix of sources that are going into funding those developments. And if you're somebody who doesn't fall within one of those, under one of those thresholds, but yet cannot afford market rate rents in the city, you're basically out of luck. Like there's nothing to help the people that are in that tranche, right? And Amanda put up some really good data about some of the people who work both for the city and in other jobs in the city, especially in the service industries that are in that tranche, right? So I guess, you know, I definitely see the benefit of restricting the affordability. I'm also worried that, you know, by imposing too many requirements on this, these in the real world tend to be pretty naturally affordable anyway. And like others have pointed out, they tend to be people who are working out, working out deals with family members or friends of family. And a lot of times I think there's another sort of thing to think about here, which is that people, there are a lot of people who are elderly in a city like this, who their house is basically their main asset, and they're living off that main asset. And this enables people to downsize, you know, have a family, you know. It could be the reverse, right? Where the person who's owned the house forever moves into the ADU. That allows a family to move into the larger house, and they have someone to help look after them. So I think, you know, in the real world, there's all sorts of arrangements that people make that allow flexibility, affordability, and people to have dignified lives at different parts of their lifespan. And I think I'm in favor of sort of maximizing the flexibility of this so we can account for the largest sort of cross-section of those different experiences among people who live in the city. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments from members of the planning board? Ms. Tarbett.
Thank you. I have two comments, one about the accessibility of the units, and if that was considered. I agree that we shouldn't make more requirements or make it more difficult. But if this is primarily or focused on our elderly population and people with mobility challenges, should there be some requirement for accessibility? For example, if you are dividing your home, I notice you can use the back door or an existing opening for an entry to the accessory dwelling unit. Typically, those aren't at grade, or if it's a secondary entry for a home, it's up a step, and that can be difficult to manage if you have a mobility challenge. So I was wondering about that. And the second was the size of the unit. My first instinct was that 900 square feet was kind of large for a one bedroom or a studio. Again, if this is primarily for or focused toward elderly people living alone or perhaps families without children, you could go smaller than 900 square feet for sure. That might help with the affordability piece of it. And I like the idea that that maybe the owner of the home is actually the one using the accessory dwelling unit, and then maybe renting out, I think I heard that right, maybe renting out the main part of their home. So that's another layer of flexibility in size as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda, would you like to address the accessibility question really quickly?
Sure. So I want to note back that the purpose of the ordinance is to try to create more housing options for smaller households. So older adults are definitely in that category, but it goes across the range of all household types, including families with children. So again, we have a lot of single parents, particularly single moms with kids, and living situations change, but we want to make sure that you have that extra bedroom in the event, allow the flexibility to have 2 bedrooms in the event you have a parent with a child. And for the accessibility, we have seen a lot of the ADUs created so far, and from what we've talked to people, they'll probably be created in basements. And so that could be very challenging. The excessive, one of the egress will probably be through a bulkhead. I just don't want to create a requirement that would make it very challenging for the accessory dwelling unit to be created.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam President. One just follow-up question to the discussion we just had relative to size of the unit. I think this goes back to what I raised earlier, was that the unit cannot be more than half the size of the main house. So if you're in a house that's only 1,600 square feet, that means the accessory unit can't be more than 800 square feet. 900 is the cap. And so if you were looking to put an addition on your house, depends how big your house is. So it's not so that you're going to over addition your house relative to the size of your existing house. So it's, you know, you want to make sure the wording is correct and to make sure that, you know, obviously if someone's going to put an addition on the house, or they're going to pull a permit to put a unit, you know, divide their house in such a way to create an, accessory dwelling unit, either in the basement or in maybe a walk-up third floor attic somehow, or however they decide, whatever works for them design-wise in order to maintain the character of their home and still provide another unit in there. I just think it's important to understand that the accessory dwelling unit is an accessory. So it means that's why the language has to be that it's smaller than the main house. Now, I totally agree. If someone has a 3-bedroom home and they want to divide it up, and Amanda, some of the stats you put out earlier relative to people who live in homes by themselves, some of those stats you put out were amazing. How many? And then I just did a head count and I started thinking around, and I'm like, how many people actually know that actually do live in a home by themselves? And I was amazed at how many people I could come up with in a short amount of time. And so I think it's important also to realize that as long as the person who owns the home is it's got their name on the deed, so to speak, is if they decide to create a smaller unit because now they've, their significant other has passed away, the family's moved the distance away, and they want to open up and they feel more comfortable in a smaller section of their existing home, and they can, make it that way, and they want to make the main part of the home that unit, then I think that having that flexibility also works as well. These are difficult discussions. No one wants to try to lose the integrity of what's considered like an R1 neighborhood. But at the same time, it's if you own a home and the person next to you happens to be a widower or however they ended up in the life that they live by themselves, there's not to say that back in the day when they were, married or had a significant other and they had 4 or 5 or 6 kids, at one point there was 8 people living in that home. And there's no, granted they were 8 people in the same family under the same roof. But today, when you look at those stats with the changing demographics if someone who was aged out in their home and they're living in a home by themselves, and I think it goes to what Councilor Torrio says, sometimes I'm not really comfortable with the whole affordability aspect, because if my mother ever got to the point where she wanted to do something like that to her home, and she doesn't live in Salem, just for the point of clarity, is if I could get someone to move into some sort of part of her house, the basement or something, and they would go over and shovel part of their rent was that they had to shovel the driveway every time it snowed, that would just spare me from having to go over there and do it. So, I mean, whatever. I think it was Todd or maybe Noah that said, whatever arrangement that someone who comes up with in their home. This ordinance is more about giving homeowners the flexibility. No one says anyone has to do this. It's just giving the homeowner an option. If they like the neighborhood they live in, and obviously if they've been in that home for a long time, they want to maintain their home. And sometimes this is just an option, and it's just giving people options. And I agree with a lot that's been said. We have to be very careful of the way we word things, but some people, it may work, it may not work. No one's making anyone put an ADU in their home. It's only if they want to, and we just got to make sure the rules are right. And as far as auxiliary structures go, that someone asked me, because that was in the original discussion, to add that. I'm just going to tell you, an auxiliary structure on a piece of property is, if you go by the rules, and once again, what was on there was it had to conform to zoning, so it has to conform to setbacks. But it's in the same instance, I mean, we all know that an auxiliary structure is capped out at 18 feet in height. So an auxiliary structure would be like a, 1.5 story garage, some maybe with a couple of dormers on it to give you some headroom, but it's going to be maxed out at 18 feet in height. It's not like someone's going to put a McMansion on the piece of property because it is an auxiliary structure. If someone wanted to put something of any more height on their property, then they would put an addition onto the main structure itself. So, I mean, if someone has, and we all went through the stats of what the requirements are. If someone has an oversized lot that they've never had a garage on, and they want to put a, maybe a 1 or 2 car garage with some sort of unit above it, I suggest people just go down Chestnut Street. Look at all those carriage houses down on, in that neck of the woods. There's a lot of auxiliary structures that have units in them that have been there for a long time. Granted, some of those height-wise may be a little bigger than we are now, but when it comes to it, if you want to exceed 18 feet, you're going to have to go for a special permit. And that's when, the rules and regs come into play, and that's why we have to be specific. But I just want to, from that meeting from last night, I just want to hammer it home one more time that the ADU can't be more than half the size of the main house.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Persinski.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, thank you, Amanda, for doing all that hard work, that legwork to bring us a very much needed and updated report that was eye-opening in a lot of ways. My question is about the auxiliary structures that Councilor McCarthy is referring to. And I know that an auxiliary structure has to meet the requirements and apply for a special permit. My question is, what are the budding property owners' rights in the permitting process? If I'm living next to someone who has a sizable lot and they decide to build a structure, an ADU, a house, a home, whatever you want to call it, on that property, I, as the abutting property owner, decide that I do not want 2 structures on a 1-family lot in my R1 neighborhood. What would be my right as that property owner have in the permitting process? How much weight would my opinion hold? Is there provisions in that so that the abutting property owners can have say on whether or not they would approve of such a structure on that property? Because it's nice to see a garage with an apartment over it, like on Chestnut Street, but that doesn't prohibit somebody from building a structure without a garage, a separate structure that looks like a little small. Even though it's an ADU, the person living in that ADU isn't going to call it their ADU. They're going to call it their home. Come into my home. So we have 2 homes in an R1 house lot. I'm just curious what the abutters' property rights are in the special permitting process. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So for a special permit is discretionary. The Zoning Board of Appeals has very specific criteria they need to look at. And so if the accessory dwelling unit is in an auxiliary building that does not comply with the setbacks of the primary structure, so remember the setbacks have to be compliance of the primary structure or any other dimensional requirements, then it needs to go through additional permitting. So the special permit requires that the zoning board take into consideration the community needs that are served by the proposal, traffic flow and safety, adequacy of utilities, but then this is where it gets to the closeness of the property line is neighborhood character, impacts on natural environment, including view. And so it's really a case-by-case situation that the zoning board will, and also potential economic fiscal impact, that sort of thing. But it's case by case. The zoning board is going to look at that. They listen to the public comments. They'll weigh that and evaluate in the criteria and make a decision based on the record and everything that they've heard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from members of the council or planning board? Seeing none, I actually had a question I forgot to ask earlier. for Amanda. I had sent this question to you earlier about section G under purpose. So it says affordable accessory dwelling units shall not I circled that for Councilor McCarthy. That's not my question. It's actually the one below it that should have a section H, and I hope you'll change that formatting error. It says no more than one affordable accessory dwelling unit shall be located upon a single lot. So my question was how that directly conflicts with section 4, application A1. Basically, to put it simply, an ADU cannot be allowed on a lot that has more than 4 units. So for lots that have 4 or fewer units, it requires that 100% of the homeowners on that lot sign on to allowing one of them to build an ADU. So if you look at that at a longer timeline, it probably means that one owner has the ability to dictate the property rights of the 2 other homeowners by this decision, this requirement that we're making in this ordinance. So I think that's a little too restrictive and maybe could potentially draw some lawsuits. And I think your response to my question is that should be up to the council. I just don't think it's very fair that, I can think of some 3-unit row houses in Ward 2 that all have basements or all have attics, and all 3 of them in the year 2021 decide that it's okay for unit 1 to build an ADU. But in 2030, unit 2 wants to build an ADU, but can't do it because unit 1 already has one. So it's not quite fair if you kind of like travel to the future. So I that was my question for Amanda, and I just want members of the council to think about that. And I would actually like to propose striking out that requirement, but would also appreciate members of the planning board to weigh in on that, if there are any comments. Seeing none, I will at this time open up to members of the public. If you wish to speak, please click on the raise hand button, and if you're on the phone, press *9. I will first recognize Senator Joan Lovely, who has joined us and would like to address members of both bodies. Senator?
Thank you, Madam President. Am I being heard?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and through you to the members of the City Council and the Planning Board. For the record, my name is Joan Lovely, State Senator for the 2nd Essex District, Beverly, Danvers, Peabody, Salem, and Topsfield. I come to you tonight in support of this amended ordinance. I'm pleased to have been appointed this session to the Joint Committee on Housing, and we'll be working very hard on the Housing Committee to continue to address our housing crunch here in the Commonwealth. I want to thank Amanda for the excellent presentation. That was really, really well done. I sit through many presentations every day. That one was exceptional, so thank you so much. I did work very closely with many of my legislative colleagues on the Economic Development Bill to allow opportunities for creative housing options like ADUs. As we know, we have heard overwhelmingly from our constituents in favor of these housing options and opportunities. And we know we have a huge housing supply deficit across our Commonwealth. We know we need more affordable housing. But we too often see that when the rubber meets the road to solve our affordable housing crisis, we hear too often that communities end up resisting solutions like this ordinance before you tonight. We know that rents are sky high because of supply and demand. We heard the vacancy rates in Salem hover around 3%. So now we know why the rents are so exorbitant and why so many people can't afford to live in this community. As we heard about seniors unable to be able to afford to stay in the community where they raise their families. We see that adult children, I have 3 millennials who would like to be able to stay in this community, who haven't started to raise families yet. I have 1 that has, who wants to stay. The other 2 do want to as well, but they don't want to live with mom and dad either, and that's okay. And so, you know, to have an ADU available to them, perhaps not in their parents' home because they can't do it, but in someone else's home, that keeps our kids here. And that keeps them here so someday when they do want to start a family and remain here. We do want to keep our next generations here so that they can stay in this community. And we are creating affordable housing, 70% of fair market rent. As we know, the rents are just incredibly high. So again, I just want to say thank you to the City Council and the Planning Board. I know how hard you're working. I sat in your chairs, not literally these chairs, but in the chamber for 15 years, working on issues just like this. So I so appreciate how hard you are all working to make this community accessible and diverse, and so that we can, again, create opportunities like this unique housing option as an ADU in the city that we care so deeply about. So Madam President, thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to the members of the City Council and the Planning Board for your diligence. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Senator, for taking the time to come out and testify. Appreciate you taking the time. I'm actually going to go down the list rather than taking comment in favor or in opposition. I just can't tell by looking at the list, so I'm just going to go down the list. First, we have Steve Kapantis.
Took a while to see the unmute button. Good evening. First, I'd like to thank everybody here tonight for all the constructive communication. I think there's been some great improvement just this evening. So many of our seniors, young professionals, entry-level employees, and service workers currently can't afford to live in Salem, and they're leaving. They represent our past, present, and more importantly, the future of our city. I fully understand and agree that an ADU will help seniors remain in their homes and will also help young professionals to afford the purchase of a new home. However, there's a flaw in this ordinance in regards to affordable ADU. There is no language or constraints on whom the affordable units will be rented to. What good is it if we're going to create affordable ADUs if they are not going to be delivered to the very people that need the affordability? I hope that this board collectively can create language that ensures that if we are entering affordable ADUs, that they get delivered to the people that need them. Otherwise, what are we accomplishing? Thank you.
Mr. Kapantis, could you perhaps clarify whether you're for or against the proposal?
I am for ADUs if they get delivered to the people. I am for affordable ADUs if they are for the people going to be delivered to the people, to those people. I am against them if it's just, we're going to call them affordable ADUs and do nothing to make sure they get delivered to people that need affordability.
Thank you. Just want to make it easy for Madam City Clerk to take the minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kapantis, for taking the time. Next, we have Stephen Nickerson.
Mr. Nixon, I allowed you to speak. If you want to unmute yourself, please.
Hear me
Name
now?
and address for the record.
Yes, Stephen Nickerson. I'm at 5 Cedar Crest Ave in Salem. Been here a resident since 1983. And first came to Salem back in '81 to run the famous Pickering Wharf Road Race, and said, hey, this is a nice place. I might want to live here. So I've been here ever since. A lot of these issues that I'm looking at, I got all these notes I've taken, and it's just that we haven't addressed some of the key principles of infrastructure for ADUs. Okay, we have traffic problems in the city we're trying to deal with. We have water and sewer issues that we haven't addressed, just some of those type of things. Not only that, parking. Whenever we have a snowstorm, we have to, deal with the snow emergency. Where do people put their cars? So in my neighborhood, essentially it's a R1 neighborhood. Now we're going to go R2. So we're essentially going to try and augment and change the complexity of the neighborhood. We're going to now add more cars because if I did this in my house, we're probably going to increase the number of cars, probably 1 or 2. My neighbor, the same thing. Where are they going to park? How is that going to involve the main thoroughways going back and forth to through Salem? And as far as trying to deal with affordable housing, last time I drove through Salem, which I do every day, I see new construction. I see in Vinton Square, many apartments going up. Canal Street, apartments. Downtown, we have apartments. Traders Way, we have apartments. Why do we need any more ADUs to just exacerbate the problem of our traffic and our infrastructure? We have I won't say every day, but almost once a week we have a water main break, and that's because we're jacking up the pressure on the water system, but we're not putting in more infrastructure. So based on that, I am totally opposed to this whole thing. And I don't want my neighbor putting up a garage next year, and then a year from now, make it into an ADU. And I think that's probably something that we haven't addressed yet. So thank you for letting me address you. And once again, and actually, when you're talking about elderly, what do you mean by elderly? Someone said that's their main asset. So I'm retired, so I want to know if I'm elderly or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nickerson, for taking the time to come out and testify. Next, we have Mr. Jeff Cohen.
Jeff, I just unmuted you. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please.
Jeff Cohen, 12 Hancock Street in Salem. Thank you, Council President Medor and Chair Grissett. I'm speaking in support of this measure. You know what's not right? So many of our fellow residents not being able to afford to live here, and so many not being able to age in place here. Addressing the imagined fear factor of negative effect on neighborhoods, these can only be in owner-occupied properties, and I trust homeowners to maintain a safe environment, not only for their residents, but also the neighborhood. Another councilor expressed concern that the city dictate rent, but then suggested 50% FMR. As utilities are included, these ADUs would not be viable, as utilities have some months exceeded 40% of the rents that I pay when I pay people's utilities. I'm under FMR for all units in my house, but 50% would be prohibitive. The concept of a confluence created when a homeowner who wants to age in place and a young person with a child living paycheck to paycheck seems like what our city is and should be about. That there are provisions in the ordinance that will ensure these units are affordable to many who can't afford to stay in their apartments long term, and Salem's rental stock has a deficiency of units this size, should finally convince councilors who have stood in the way to help pass it unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen, for taking the time to testify. Next, we have Fawaz Abushart.
Whether I muted you, could you please state your name and address for the record?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's a first. Thank you, everybody, for the good work that you're doing, especially Amanda and Tom for the excellent presentation. Generally, I like many of the things about this ordinance. I like the fact that it has a lot of restrictions, because I don't like restrictions on, developers and stuff like this. But with this, it will more keep it to actually help and serve the main purpose we're trying to add it. If we make it loose, there might be other loopholes, there might be some strays of the main purpose. With all these restrictions in general, it will keep it more about affordability and for the people that is intended to do it. I have two concerns that were raised, one by Madam President, which is like, if you have a duplex or a multi-thing house, who gets the ADU? And I will not support, in my opinion, that if you have a 3 family and each one owned by one, to have 3 ADUs. It's just, to me, that doesn't, I would not agree with that. There has to be some other form where maybe the original owner, whatever it is, there has to be some form maybe formed here where only one person or one group, or they can do it as a trust or something where everybody can benefit. But 3 ADUs because we have 3 owners, I don't think that's really a good idea. The other point that I kind of think about was brought by Councillor Dibble, which is the short-term rental or the Airbnb or something like this. We do not allow it in the ADU, but if I move to the ADU, I can do it with the house. That doesn't make sense. If we're trying to stop short-term rental, then I think it should be stopped in all units. If you want to build an ADU, we're giving you already a mean to make money and to support and be able to stay there. We're not going to give you another way of making it a hotel or something. And, to me, this becomes more of a loophole than an actual necessity. Because if you have a small EDU that you can build it there, so you can say you live there, while you can in reality live somewhere else, and meanwhile you can have a whole house to rent. It just doesn't, both items is more about, it creates loopholes. Beside that, I think it's a good ordinance. I like the affordability and the limits. I like the addition of Councillor McCarthy, which is by the state, about the size. So it's really getting together where I think it's something that many people can stand behind. But if we can just cover the small loopholes and the little things here and there, I think we will have a good ordinance for the city. Thank you for listening, and God bless you. Sorry, breakfast time again. I'm sorry. It always timed this way for some reason. I don't know. Thank you very much. God bless everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Abishak, for taking the time to testify. Next, we have Ben Johnson.
And I unmuted you. If you can state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi there. I'm Ben Johnson. I'm at 19 Aborn Street. Thank you for hearing me. And I'll start by saying, as I'm hearing this, I'm generally in favor. And I believe, if you build it, they will come. And just, I wanted to comment that I think I'm not terribly concerned about people who are well-to-do snapping these up. I think that if anything, I would be more concerned about people trying to use something like this to create Airbnb opportunities. But I have a question. As I listened to Amanda's presentation, I was looking at some of those numbers and trying to figure out how it might fit into my situation. I'm actually in a 4-bedroom house, and I am living alone. I've been living previously with my father as I was taking care of him in this home until he passed away. So I'm looking at this to see if this is something that's feasible. And one thing that I heard, I'm looking at the rent cap, 70% of the fair market value. I understood that. And then I heard later, 1 utility hookup. And so, and I apologize if this is just my misunderstanding about the basics here, but when I hear 1 utility hookup, I hear one electric meter. And so does this mean that we are having people basically sublet their electric service and whatnot to whoever's renting it out, that they're not family members? And is this in any way, if I even have that correct, is this in any way a departure from what was previously the theory about about how these things get done. And as a follow-on to that, I'm wondering if that is the case, if you're kind of requiring that things like electric be included for these units, does the do the numbers that you worked up include that in the figuring? For example, 1635 is 70% of the fair market value for a 2-bedroom, utilities included. So that would be my question on that. And that's about all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for taking the time. Amanda, could you quickly address the utility question?
Yeah, that is a very important distinction. So I'm glad that we're clarifying that the maximum rent, the 70%, does include utilities. So for that example, a 2-bedroom at 1635, that includes the utilities.
And the single utility hookup?
And the single utility hookup is a requirement. You cannot have separate utilities for the accessory dwelling unit because, again, we want this to be a subordinate accessory structure to that primary home, not a separate unit.
Thank you. Next, we have Jen Lynch.
Jen, I unmuted you. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Certainly. Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jen Lynch. I live at 38 Charles Street. I'm here tonight on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Salem to express our endorsement of the AADU ordinance. The League's Affordable Housing Working Group studied these and previous versions of proposed ADU ordinances. When we review ordinances, we do so in the context of the U.S. and Massachusetts League positions on affordable housing. The League's formal goal is to work towards access to decent housing and a suitable living environment affordable for all. The League supports programs, policies, and regulations that address the housing needs of low and moderate income families and individuals. The previous versions were well-intentioned but lacked a regulatory approach and left the affordability component to market forces. In the time between the original ordinance and this one, a housing needs assessment for Salem noted, quote, "There is a significant mismatch between the size of Salem's housing units and the size of households. Salem has a significantly higher proportion of smaller households than smaller housing units. Larger units are generally more expensive in regard to not just mortgage or rent payments, but also energy costs. And the mismatch limits the availability of financially attainable housing options for smaller households." The ordinance submitted on February 11th includes affordability in the definition of an accessory dwelling unit, capping rent at 30% below Salem's market rate as set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And further, the ordinance requires a letter of intent by the homeowner committing to the rent restriction as part of the application process. And it clarifies who is responsible for enforcement. While this ordinance will not solve the housing crisis, it will create and formalize rental options that can benefit homeowners and home seekers by repurposing existing spaces. As a side note, creating livable space within the confines of an existing building, in this case a home or garage, reduces the need for construction of new buildings and the consumption of land, energy, materials, and financial resource. So it's our opinion that this is a small step in the right direction, and we look forward to working with the community and the council so that this is finally passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch, for taking the time. Next, we have Rosa Ordaz.
Hi, Rosa, if you can unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Rosa Ordaz. I'm at 13 Forest Avenue. A lot of what I came here to say in support of the ADU ordinance has already been stated, so I will try to be brief. Senator Lovely's comments and Jen Lynch's comments right before me were spot on, and I guess the only thing I would want to add is the city council meeting last Thursday with the moratorium on building and developing on wetlands and flood zones. I wanted to thank Councillor Riccardi and Councillor Morcillo for their comments on possible green initiatives that the city can actually consider to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that ADUs are not only diversifying the housing stock, but also a solid step in that many homeowners, as has been stated earlier in this meeting, have basements or attics or current garages that could be converted to ADUs and therefore bring more affordable housing options and also reduce the carbon footprint that comes with new development. So thank you all for your time. And I hope that we can get to a good place with this version of the ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Fordas, for coming out to testify. Next, James Davis.
James, I just unmuted you. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Hey everyone, my name is James Davis. I live at 32 Buffum Street in North Salem. I just wanted to thank everybody for the time and effort that they've put in to this, especially Amanda. That was a great presentation. I feel like I learned a lot. I don't come to these things very often, but this is an issue that I've been kind of paying attention to over the years. So a lot of what needed to be said, I feel like has been said, but I just want to state that I'm strongly in favor of this ordinance. I think this particular issue has been on the docket in Salem for way too long, and the council has consistently let perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm a millennial who's lucky enough to also be a homeowner in Salem, and I look forward to spending the decades to come in this community. And I think the concerns of infrastructure are way overblown. Like Amanda said, if we were to look at other communities that have done this, we might be looking at like 30 or 40 units. I don't think it's going to be the influx that people are worried about that's going to impact parking and traffic and all that and all of those things. And also, I think the insinuation that affordable housing is somehow going to be associated with crime is insulting. This is a workforce housing ordinance, and it's going to help open up walkability to those in the city who already are working here. So I just want to thank everyone for their time, and have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, for taking the time to come out and testify. Next, we have Derek Thomas.
Derek, if you could state your name and address for the record, please, and unmute yourself.
Derek?
Mr. Thomas, if you can unmute yourself.
You were muted for a second and then, oh, there you go. We can't hear you. Do you want to log back in and we'll try you again? We'll take up the next testimony. I'm going to Felipe Zamberlini.
Felipe, I'm allowing you to speak. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Councilor Midori. Speaking in support of the underlying amended ordinance. And I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, but I am not here speaking on behalf of the board. I would actually specifically like to share a little bit of how this will impact my family and I in the near future once it's enacted. We have a 6-month-old, just turned 6 months 2 days ago, and we're crazy enough to have begun already conversations of number 2 and what that would look like. And I know that many of you have children, and many of you know the cost of daycare is astounding. And in a time especially where the daycare near us here in the Point, especially what we typically would rely on, it's pretty much gone. What's available, really, we're really having to think of unique and different ways of finding ways to have our family be able to grow and take care of the little one. One way that we found is that we got to move into a bigger place. If we move into a 3-family, we can probably have one of our in-laws, probably my wife's mom and dad, who are 74-year-old, move in and assist us with some of the cost of the property and all that and whatnot. If we move into a 2-family, that can't happen because we can't properly have them move in. Their income is very little. And we wouldn't be able to have something where we rent to them only and fully afford the cost plus some kind of daycare to support it all since they're 74-year-old. We'd have to have some kind of ADU available to us so they could live in the ADU and we could have the other property rented to be able to afford this. So if we were looking for a single family, quite frankly, single families are not even in our picture right now. We can't afford a single family in the city of Salem right now. We just can't. It's impossible. Why? We'd have to continue paying childcare somehow. So we need to have something that's a little bit better. And the reality is, the only way to make it a little bit better would be to build something in it. So you're looking at somebody who moved to Salem, loves the city of Salem, has been engaged in the city of Salem from day one since we moved up here. And we want to find a way to stay. And the reality is, once it comes time for us to, look into growing, we might not be able to stay if we can't be able to create the environment for us to raise our family. So I think this ordinance does just that, creates opportunity for folks like me who, just like the former speaker said, millennials are struggling to find our place in a society, in a world where it gets more and more expensive and yet our incomes don't grow. And this is a really useful tool for us. It's a real tool for us to be able to, in the future, say something like one of the commenters made earlier here, that they've been in Salem for 25 plus years. I love to be in Salem for 25 plus years. It might take an ADU for me to be able to do that. And I'm really serious about this. And the reality is, whether it's attached or detached, you know what, at the end of the day, I would frankly prefer to be slightly detached so that my in-laws who are 74-year-old don't have to feel like they're bound by us and have their independence. I know they've told us this already, that they wouldn't want to be living in an ADU that's attached to the property because they'd feel like they're inside the house and they want their independence and they deserve their independence. They've lived their life. So this underlying ordinance with the modifications that have been made, it meets what we're going to need in the near future, in the very near future, as we're looking for a property, probably this summer, maybe next summer at the very latest. And so it's pretty exciting to see that the modifications have been made to allow for folks like my wife and I to really consider our proper long-term 25, 35, 50 years of time in Salem. And so I hope that as you think about the future of this ordinance, you think about the future of families like mine that are currently trying to figure out how to stay in Salem in the long haul and not just try to move in here and not be part of the fabric of our society, which is a lot of folks are trying to be part of the fabric of the society. And quite frankly, this is a great way of integrating us even more. And I hope you guys take the actions necessary to move it forward. Thank you. Oh, and 62 Perkins Street in Salem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zambolini, for taking the time. Well, next, let's try Mr. Derek Thomas again.
Mr. Thomas, if you can unmute yourself, see if we can hear you this time.
Derek Thomas, 48 St. Peter Street. Although I feel like I've lost all credibility that I cannot unmute my computer. So I do better when we're in council chambers and everyone can see me speaking. So again, 48 St. Peter Street. I'm here to speak tonight, certainly in favor of ADU ordinances, though I am certainly most biased to them. My background, to lend a little bit of more credibility to myself, is we are an ADU builder. It is arguable that I have built, designed and built more ADUs in the state of Massachusetts than any other general contractor or design builder. We're listed on accessorydwellings.org as the only design builder in Massachusetts. And again, I usually don't call into or go to city or town meetings that are on the sort of policy side in planning. However, again, I am a resident. I spoke in favor of ADUs last year when it came up. And most importantly, what I'd like to say is, we have built ADUs from Rockport out to Oxford, Massachusetts. We've built within existing structures, detached structures, 3 families, basements, everything. At any given time, we have them 3 to 5 ADUs in the design build process in our pipeline. And obviously there's a lot of questions still. I know there's still a long way to go on this before anybody breaks ground on an accessory dwelling unit in Salem. but I would like to offer maybe my advice, my guidance, any questions that I could answer. The email, is that okay to give out, I'm assuming? It's Derek, DEREK, at Incremental Developers, which is also, it's incrementaldevelopers.com is our website. Happy on, again, not so much the policy or theoretical and hypotheticals, but clients and customers that we have built these for, that again is not hypothetical. These are real world situations. They're real people. Almost everybody tonight that's had a question or comment about different uses and situations, from building code to who is using these, we've dealt with or built for almost every different type of scenario. So again, just not so much to advocate for them, which I obviously do, but certainly happy to answer questions, good, bad, indifferent, sort of from a non-biased, truly non-biased. If there are pros and cons to everything, and I'm again as a resident here and have been a resident for a long time. My family goes back here to the 1700s, so we've been here a while. Happy to answer those questions for anybody. Thank you again for the time.
Thank you for taking the time to come out, Mr. Thomas. We'll have a few more, but for any members from the public, if you would like to speak, please remember to raise your hand with the raise hand button at the bottom, or if you're on the phone, press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. Next, we have Alice Merkel.
Alice, I unmuted you. If you can state your name and address for the record, please.
Alice, you want to try and mute yourself again?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Alice Merkel, 28A Federal Street here in Salem. And I want to speak in support of the ordinance for the ADU expansion. First of all, thank you all for all the really hard work you've done on this. It's been very informative tonight, and it's much appreciated. Most of what I feel has already been said, but just to elaborate on that, has been discussed, the addition of ADUs has the benefit of creating naturally affordable living spaces, being smaller in size, and can help struggling homeowners stay in their homes. And I have so many conversations with residents in Salem that want to stay in Salem, and their rents are going up, and they just don't think they can stay, and they really want to stay in Salem. That's always the first thing I hear from anyone, is that I'd like to stay in Salem. So this is just another option. It's going to take a lot of tools in the toolbox to address our affordable housing crisis, but this is a step we can take, and I hope that we take it. And especially with the COVID crisis, it's just going to increase, the housing. There's so many people struggling to keep a roof over their head, even more so with COVID. And I hope this happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Merkel, for taking the time to come out tonight. Next, we have Jeff.
Jeff, I allowed you to speak. If you could state your name and address for the record.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my name is Jeff Millar, and I live at 29 Boardman Street. I've lived in Salem for coming up on just about 16 years now, which I know makes me new in town. And in the time that I've lived here, I have rented, owned a condo, owned a single family house, rented and rented again, and rent currently. And conversations like this frequently make me feel like my value as a member of the Salem community is tied to whether or not there's a deed attached to my name at the moment in time. Because when I'm a homeowner in Ward 4, which I have been, there's been no question about that. But I would tell you that if you look at the comments that you've received tonight, and if you look at the people we can see on the screen right now, I'm one of a very, very small number of current renters who have participated in this conversation. And I think it's very easy when I've, quote, got mine and I'm locked into a 30-year housing payment at a rate that only changes based on taxes and insurance rather than market corrections, to take a protectionist view. I would say that responding to several of the things I've heard tonight, I would encourage all of you to reject any argument on this topic that will tell you that the sky is falling if this passes, and also reject any argument that says this is the savior to a housing crisis. It's neither. I would agree with Ms. Merkel that it can potentially be a tool in the toolbox. I would agree with Ms. Sides that if it's going to be in the tool, if it's going to actually be a tool in the toolbox, it needs to not be so difficult that nobody can use it. It feels a little bit like threading a needle to me to begin with. And the smaller you make that hole in the needle, the more it becomes completely meaningless. I've also heard people tonight talk about how we shouldn't put a price cap on it. I imagine some other people looked at those potential price caps and said, wow, that's a lot of money for rent. I would tell you, if you go out and look at the market right now, especially when you consider that it includes utilities, it's a pretty good deal for a lot of people. And I would say that's a good deal for a lot of people, both as the rentor and the rentee. I'm paying more money to rent right now than the cap would be, and that's without utilities. And when I think about what my utilities costs have been over the last 12 months as I've worked from home and had to keep the house heated to 64 degrees instead of 55 degrees during the day, utilities makes a big difference in all of that. Other things I took note of, there's been some conversation about what the quality of life would be for an abutter to a property that suddenly has an ADU on it. I hope you'll all remember that the property that has the ADU on it also, by definition, has the owner of the property continuing to live on it. And I don't think that any of your neighbors are trying to destroy the quality of life on the parcel that they live on. I think many of them are looking for ways to continue living on that parcel that they live on. I'm not sure that the 900 square foot limit makes sense. I know there was some talk about the number of single family or single parent households there are in Salem. 900 square feet is not a lot. The very first place I owned in Salem was 804 square feet. And once we had children, we had to move out of there. It just didn't work anymore. So I understand the need to keep it an accessory, a secondary use of the property. I'm not sure that limiting the square footage to some random arbitrary number makes sense. Additionally, I would say that I'm not sure there needs to be a, quote, 2-bedroom limit to the accessory unit either, because, you know, having been a single parent in Salem with 2 children, one of whom is a boy and one of whom is a girl, 2 bedrooms works for a little while. It doesn't work forever. Even if I could make 900 square feet work, 2 bedrooms doesn't necessarily. And I'm not sure that that's a necessary requirement. I think that's just about all I have tonight. Thank you all for considering it, and I hope you'll look at the broad Salem rather than the landownered Salem.
Thank you, Mr. Millar, for taking the time to come out. Next, we have Stan Franzine.
Franzine, I love you to speak. If you can mute yourself and state your name and address for the record, please. Nope.
Mr. Franzine, you might want to log back in. We can hear you, but the sound is not quite right. If you could log back in. And I'll call on you.
It's usually Fuzzy who has that problem.
Next, we have Whitney.
Whitney, I'm going to allow you to speak. If you could state your name and address for the record, please. You can.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, Mary Whitney, 356 Essex Street, Unit 2. And I just think that this ordinance is getting better with the attention that and hard work people are putting into it. I am not a fan of the new detached structure portion. I'm sorry, I missed the details. I was just reading what was on the city website, that it looks like there's two parts, 1 and 2, and the second part is applying everything to a new detached structure. So it's that part I'm not in favor of. And the reason is I'm concerned with the building on and paving over of previous surfaces. And I live in a neighborhood where we don't really have parks, and the parks are backyards. The backyards are abutting very close. The existing buildings are not, most of them are not in conformance. So it's not really clear to me how it, if the principal dwelling is not in conformance, maybe you already addressed this, how the new detached would conform along these backyards that are basically creating one contiguous area of green space. So I think it's great to have the organic growth through the existing structures, but I'm opposed to the loss of the green space by allowing people to put more structures in their yards. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Whitney, for taking the time to testify tonight. I don't see any more hands raised, but I'm going to take another call for public testimony. I'm glad to see most people stayed on. They're still around. If you'd like to provide public testimony, please raise your hand. I'm waiting for Stan to come back. In the meantime, any further comments or questions from members of the City Council or the Planning Board? Councilor McCarthy, and then Councilor Dibble. Councilor McCarthy?
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Thank you, Madam President. My only question to Amanda would be the presentation that you put out earlier. Will that be available on the city's website? I think it was excellent, and so I think it's a good. I think it'd be a good reference tool for people's, just to make sure that that gets out there. And so if we could just assure that that is made available at some point over the next couple of days on the city's website, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Agreed. Councilor Dibble.
I got the correct button. Thank you, Madam President. Often we learn quite a bit in public testimony. So, Madam President, I thank you for allowing everybody to speak beyond the 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute that we usually allow in the city council meetings. I thought Steve Capan's comments, and it's something that I didn't think about on getting people that need a lower priced housing into these units. So we're setting a price on a cap, a maximum price for these units, the studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, but we're not requiring that they be lower income or medium income people to go into these units. So I'm wondering, Tom Daniels, through our president, if you can ask Amanda to kind of take a crack at possibly writing up some wording that would allow that to take place for our consideration, if you could distribute it to both boards here before our next meeting. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I think we need to we need to digest what that is. And if we can actually do that, whether the city solicitor, in her opinion, would say that that's something that we legally can do. Again, it's private property, and we're telling people how much to rent these units for. On the other hand, we're telling them who they can rent to if we go that route. But I think we need to explore and ask that question. So, Tom, if you can have Amanda do some research on that and write something up and get that out to us. And again, with the city solicitor opinion. I thought Steve Nickerson's comments were very good. And earlier I said I wasn't going to ask the city engineer to weigh on the sewer and water and other impacts for the additional growth, including traffic. But I'd like to hear the city engineer, Dave Knowlton, his comments and his opinion on the impacts of this to the city with regard to sewer and water impacts, the increased usage, and the traffic impacts, the increased traffic. The third comment I thought was very good as well was on the detached structures. This is something that's bothered me since the get-go on allowing to build a second house on the same property. I think that takes away from the overall neighborhood. And it might be something that I'd motion later after I think about it, maybe talk to Amanda and talk to Tom Daniels a little bit more on this, and hear from Tom St. Pierre, our building inspector, actually our zoning enforcement officer, on detached structures. So that might be a motion for a later meeting for me, where I might introduce that after doing some more research on this, to strike the detached structure right out of the ordinance, because I think it just changes and overcrowds the city unnecessarily. Thank you. This is a great meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Councilor Duval, could you clarify the existing detached or new detached? Because they're two different orders.
I think we'll look at both of them independently. The new, I think we need to address both of them. Because the new detached is something new that just came to us 2 weeks ago, or whenever it was, a couple weeks ago. And the existing detached, whereas you can take your existing garage or a big shed or something, another structure on your property, and turn that into a second house on the property. So I'm addressing both of them, even though they're listed separately in here. The detached second house on the same property, having two houses on a single family lot has never really made sense to me at all. So I want to do some more digging on that right now, whereas the mayor just significantly expanded this, allowing for new detached structures, allowing for a brand new house to be built in somebody's backyard. We need to study that a little bit more and make sure that this is what we want to do. I'm not looking to slow this process down. I'll do this research over the next couple of weeks before we meet again.
Councilor Turrio.
Forgot to unmute. It's been a while. Thank you, Madam President, through you. I'd like to thank all the people who spoke to this, regardless of their position, because we heard a lot of very well-reasoned discussion tonight. And in previous renditions of this, we've had much more heated talk, and I think this is good. We've lowered the temperature some and had a much more reasonable and rational discussion than we've had in attempts past. And I think it's a real positive. I also want to thank especially all the comments that have been excellent from the planning board members. These are the volunteer experts that the city depends on to help navigate these kind of situations and make zoning decisions and make decisions on individual projects. And we have a really good group of people on the planning board today, and they do a terrific job. And it's always, there's a lot of these people that I really like to see, and I wish I could see them in person more, and hopefully someday soon. But that includes you, Councilor Fury. So anyhow, yeah, you get to see me downstairs. I'm just virtually there. And then the other thing I'd kind of like to ask that when you at the planning board, and just clarify something too. So we have two versions of the ordinance in front of us, and the intent on bringing the detached structures as a separate building into this as a separate proposal was in order to keep the direction and the discussion that the planning board is going to have on this within the four corners of what is permissible in a zoning discussion. So if this was brought in, if there was a will to bring this in afterwards, it wouldn't be possible if we didn't account for it in this process. So that's the reason why it's there. I personally, as I mentioned earlier, would prefer to see the construction of new standalone ADU structures not be permitted by right as part of this. I think conversion of existing structures or addition of that function to an existing structure, I think is very reasonable, but a new structure I'm not so fond of. And I'd also hope that in the discussion, the planning board takes a good look at that and takes a good look at that affordability component and whether we are better able to do this with incentives rather than with a hard requirement. I want to see these units all be more affordable than units that are just generally available of unrestricted independent apartments. And a lot of the things of the nature of an ADU make them so, but I'd like to see us be able to push to try and drive those costs and prices down further. And because the fewer roadblocks we put in the way of building them and the fewer requirements we have, the more I think the natural desire of people to build these will be able to be fulfilled. And I think, the natural market for these will keep the costs below the rest of the rental market. I think that's going to be really beneficial to us. And having some of these requirements hardwired in, I think will wind up being discouraging. I'll just kind of echo off what Jeff said late in the public comment part of the discussion. The more obstacles we put in the way, the less likely people are going to want to navigate those obstacles and actually produce a unit. And I don't think even in a most optimistic case scenario that we're going to see more than 30 or so of these permits a year. And I think the very first year we might see more, but I think a lot of that is going to be people taking their existing illegal ADUs that are there right now and legalizing them. I think that's going to be a real factor, and it's not going to be new construction. It's going to be existing construction that people just want to get legal with, and maybe get in some incentives in place to preserve that. So I want to see more production of these. We have a lot of work we have to do as a city to try and encourage affordable housing. This is just one small piece of it that somehow has become a real linchpin politically, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Solving this and getting a reasonable ADU ordinance in place in our zoning is going to help. It's going to help people. And every single person who moves into an ADU is going to be helped in our rental market. And that's a positive. But we have other work to do. We still have an inclusionary zoning ordinance that we haven't been able to get through. That's been run up on the rocks, multiple times. It took us a lot of time to get our reuse ordinance passed, and there's a lot of more work we can and need to do to try and fix things. This is only a small piece of it, but I'm glad that we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to respond to one quick thing. I don't mean to speak too many times. It's just in reference to what Council Dibble just said. First of all, the mayor didn't bring in this second ordinance. I did, because a couple of people approached me because it was originally in the ordinance from a couple of years ago that we first took a look at. So people asked me to add it. And when I talked to the city solicitor, she said it would probably be beneficial to try to add it on the floor would be to add it. That order came in 2 weeks after the original order came in, which both of them came in over 6 weeks ago. So they didn't come in 2 weeks ago. So it isn't like anyone has been, it just happened. So just for clarity, I just want to make sure everyone has an understanding is this came in 2 weeks after the original, only because I was approached by a couple people that were curious about it. And then my conversation with the city solicitor, she felt it was better if we brought it in and added it to the table. I don't have a preference for it one way or the other. All I'm saying is, that's our job, is to vet it out, have these discussions and talk about it. But all I'm saying is, I take offense to the fact that, he makes a statement, that he makes a statement basically accusing the mayor of trying to add second homes on people's one-family lots. No one's trying to add a second home on anyone's lot. We're here having a discussion, and to be honest with you, it came from me, and I have no intent of trying to add anyone's another home on someone's one family, in an R1 zone. It has to conform to the rules. So I just want to make that statement, is the fact the mayor didn't bring it in, I did. And it wasn't brought in just 2 weeks ago. It was brought in over a month ago. It was 2 weeks after the first one was brought in. And I think both of them were brought in over 6 or 8 weeks ago. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Counselor, for that clarification. I don't see Stan join us again. I'm going to take a final call for any comment from both members of the council or planning board. Seeing none. Seeing none. So just to quickly explain to members of the public who are in attendance tonight, this is a joint public hearing of these two bodies. The next step is for if the will of the body tonight is as such, we'll have the planning board deliberate at their own meeting separately and provide a recommendation to the city council at the soonest possible regular meeting. And at that time, we may refer the recommendation to committee for further deliberation, or we may choose to accept and take a vote on the ordinance. I just want to be clear that tonight is not the time where we take a vote on the ordinance. And with that, we do have two orders before us. As Councilor McCarthy had clarified earlier, the second one, number 97, is in the addition of the newly detached ADUs to the use table. So I would like to have the public vote on closing the public hearing separately on both orders rather than take them both up. So I'm going to recognize Councilor Marcillo for that.
We have an order.
Madam President. Go ahead.
Did you want me to read it, Councilor Madore?
Can we take up 68 first and?
You closing the public hearing to close it? Or are you talking about the other ordinance?
Just for 68.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. So I'll make a motion to close this public hearing.
Councilor Marcillo moves to close the public hearing by roll call vote.
By roll call vote.
Do I have to seek discussion on that? Okay. Seconded by Councilor Posnewski. Do I have to take a discussion on that, Madam City Clerk? No, okay. And with that, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilor Torrio?
Yes.
Councilor Sargent?
Yes.
Councilor Riccardi?
Yes.
Councilor Panucci?
Yes.
Councilor Marcillo?
Yes.
Councilor McCarthy?
Yes.
Was a priority.
Yes.
Councilor Flynn?
Yes.
Dominguez?
Yes.
Councilor Dibble?
Yes.
And Councilor Madore?
Yes. On closing the public hearing on amending zoning relative to ADUs without the detached accessory building. We have 11 councilors voting, 11 affirmative, none in the negative, the matter carries. Councilor Marcillo.
Thank you, Madam President. Is this to open or close number 97? Did we open it?
If you could move that the matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation by roll call vote.
I'll make the motion to to refer this to the planning board by roll call vote.
Councilor Marcillo moves that the matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation by roll call vote. Your second?
Not needed, Madam President.
Okay, thank you. It's my first joint public hearing, my first JPH.
And you're doing fantastic.
All right. On the motion to close the public hearing, oh, sorry. Duh. Is it 3 hours now, by now? On the motion to move the matter To refer the matter to the planning board for recommendation by roll call vote, Madam C. Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Torio,
Yes.
Counselor Sargent,
Yes.
Counselor Riccardi,
Yes.
Counselor Prosnewski,
Yes.
Counselor Marcillo,
Yes.
Counselor McCarthy,
Yes.
Yes.
Counselor Hapworth,
Yes.
Counselor Flynn,
Yes.
Counselor Dominguez,
Yes.
Counselor Dibble,
Yes.
and Counselor Medora.
Yes. On the motion to move the matter of amending zoning relative to ADUs without the detached accessory building to the planning board for their recommendation, we have 11 councilors voting, 11 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The matter carries. The second order, Madam City Clerk, if you could read that.
We have an ordinance amending zoning relative to ADU, section 310, 3.2.4, and 3.2.8 with detached accessory building.
Councilor Marcillo. Can you move to close the public hearing? By roll call.
I'll move to close the public hearing by roll call vote.
Councilor Marcillo moves to close the public hearing by roll call vote. Madam C. Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Torio,
Yes.
Counselor Sargent,
Yes.
Counselor Riccardi,
Yes.
Counselor Prosnewski,
Yes.
Counselor Marcillo,
Yes.
Counselor McCarthy,
Yes.
Counselor Hapworth,
Yes.
Counselor Flynn,
Yes.
Counselor Dominguez,
Yes.
Counselor Dibble,
Yes.
and Counselor Medora.
Yes. On the motion to close the public hearing, we have 11 councilors voting, 11 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The matter carries. Councilor Marcillo.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll make a motion to refer this to the planning board by roll call vote.
Councilor Marcillo moves that the matter be referred to the planning board for their recommendation by roll call vote. Madam C. Clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Torio,
Yes.
Counselor Sargent,
Yes.
Counselor Riccardi,
Yes.
Counselor Prosnewski,
Yes.
Counselor Marcillo,
Yes.
Counselor McCarthy,
Yes.
Counselor Hapworth,
Yes.
Counselor Flynn,
Yes.
Counselor Dominguez,
Yes.
Counselor Dibble,
Yes.
and Counselor Medora.
Yes. On the matter to refer zoning amendment relative to ADUs with detached accessory building to the planning board for the recommendation, we have 11 councilors voting, 11 affirmative, none negative. The matter carries. Councilor Sargent.
I move for adjournment, please.
Councilor Sargent moves for adjournment. All those in favor? I see 11 hands. All opposed, seeing none. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. That was really great discussion. Appreciate all the time you've taken.
Thank you.